The autumn wind swept through the streets of Gangnam, carrying with it the scent of chrysanthemums and the promise of change. The ginkgo trees lining Tehran Row had turned brilliant gold, their leaves scattered across the sidewalks like nature's confetti. Soo-min stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse apartment on the 42nd floor, watching the city lights flicker to life below as dusk settled over Seoul. 38 years of living, 12 years of marriage, and tonight, everything she believed about her life would shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. She had spent the afternoon preparing Jae-won's favorite dinner. Doenjangjjigae simmered to perfection, galbi marinated in her grandmother's secret sauce, and fresh vegetables from the organic market in Nonhyun-dong. The apartment smelled of home and comfort, and she had even set out candles on the dining table, hoping to recapture some of the romance that had slowly leached from their marriage over the years. The door opened behind her and she heard the familiar sound of her husband's footsteps in the marble entryway. Jae-won had always walked with purpose, each step measured and deliberate, the gait of a man who knew exactly where he was going in life. But tonight, there was hesitation in his movement, a pause that made her heart clench with foreboding. Jae-won, you are home early. Soo-min turned to face him, her smile genuine but uncertain. Their 8-year-old daughter Yuna ran past her, abandoning her coloring book on the coffee table to throw herself into her father's arms. Daddy, look what I made at school today. It is a family portrait. See, there is you and Mommy and me and our house with the big windows. Teacher Park said it was the best one in class. Jae-won's face flickered with something Soo-min could not quite name. In 12 years of marriage, she had learned to read his expressions like a book, but this one was new to her. He patted Yuna's head absently, his eyes not really seeing the crayon drawing she held up so proudly. That is very nice, Yuna. Why do you not go to your room and finish your homework? Daddy needs to talk to Mommy about some important business, but I want to show you my drawing. Yuna's lower lip trembled, her eyes filling with the quick tears of childhood disappointment. I worked really hard on it. I even used the special gold crayon for your tie, because you always wear gold ties to important meetings. Soo-min's heart ached at her daughter's words. Yuna had been trying so hard lately to get her father's attention, making cards and drawings, practicing her piano pieces until they were perfect, keeping her room immaculately clean. She had noticed that Daddy was home less and less, and in her innocent way she was trying to bring him back. A woman appeared in the doorway behind Jae-won, and Soo-min felt her blood turn to ice. She recognized that face, those perfectly manicured nails painted in a deep burgundy, that designer dress from Dolce & Gabbana that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Yuna, her husband's executive assistant of 3 years, stood there with a hand resting possessively on her barely visible baby bump, a smile playing at the corners of her artificially plumped lips. Soo-min remembered the day she had recommended Yuna for the position. The young woman had come from Busan with nothing but a business degree from a provincial university and big dreams. She had been earnest and hardworking, or so it had seemed. Soo-min had taken pity on her, had convinced Jae-won to give her a chance when more qualified candidates were available. She had even mentored the girl, teaching her how to navigate the treacherous social waters of Seoul's elite circles. Jae-won cleared his throat, the sound loud in the suddenly silent apartment. Soo-min, we need to talk. Yuna, please go to your room now. This is adult business. The child looked between the adults, her innocent eyes sensing the tension that crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. At 8 years old, she was too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to feel that something was terribly wrong. Mommy, is everything okay? Your face looks sad. Everything is fine, sweetheart. Soo-min kept her voice steady through sheer force of will, drawing on 12 years of practice at maintaining composure in difficult situations. Go do your homework, and I will come check on you soon. I promise. She watched her daughter walk reluctantly down the hallway, clutching her crayon drawing to her chest like a shield. Only when she heard Yuna's bedroom door close did Soo-min turn her full attention to the tableau before her. Her husband of 12 years, standing beside a woman who was clearly carrying his child, in the home they had built together. The home she had decorated with care, filled with memories of birthdays and anniversaries, of quiet Sunday mornings reading the newspaper in bed, and laughter-filled dinner parties with friends. How long? Her voice came out surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the earthquake happening inside her chest. She could feel her heart pounding so hard she was surprised the others could not hear it. Yuna stepped forward, her chin lifted with an arrogance that took Soo-min's breath away. Gone was the humble girl from Busan who had bowed deeply and called her Unnie with respect. In her place stood a woman drunk on victory, ready to claim her prize. 3 years. And before you start making a scene, you should know that this baby is the heir Jae-won has always wanted. A son. Something you could never give him. The words hit Soo-min like physical blows, each one landing with surgical precision on wounds she thought had healed long ago. She had suffered 3 miscarriages before Yuna, each loss carving away a piece of her soul. The doctors had warned her that another pregnancy could be dangerous, might even kill her. And Jae-won had said he understood, said that Yuna was enough, that their family was complete. He had held her hand in the hospital and told her she was all he needed. Lies. All of it lies. Jae-won, look at me. Soo-min's voice cracked despite her best efforts. Look at me and tell me this is real. Tell me that everything we built together means nothing to you. Her husband finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her stomach drop. There was no remorse, no guilt, only the cold calculation of a man who had already made his decision long ago. The man she loved, the man she had sacrificed everything for, looked at her like she was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Soo-min, you have to understand. My father is putting pressure on me. The company needs an heir, a male heir to carry on the Park family legacy. Yuna is a wonderful child. But she is a girl. The board members are traditional. They will never accept her as my successor. You know how important family legacy is in our world. She thought of Chairman Park, Jae-won's formidable father, who had built Park Industries from nothing into one of Korea's largest conglomerates. The old man had always been cool toward her, disappointed that his son had married for love rather than strategic advantage. He had made pointed comments at family gatherings about the importance of male heirs, had frowned when Yuna was born instead of the grandson he expected. She had always believed Jae-won was on her side, protecting their family from his father's outdated views. Another lie. So our daughter means nothing to you? Soo-min's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. 12 years of marriage, all the sacrifices I made, supporting you when you were starting out with nothing, giving up my own career at Lee and Kim law firm to raise our daughter while you built your empire. I was on track to become the youngest partner in the firm's history. I gave that up for you, for us. All of that means nothing because I could not give you a son. Yuna laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the penthouse. Please spare us the melodrama. It does not suit you. You got to enjoy the good life for 12 years. Nice clothes, expensive jewelry, this ridiculous apartment with its view of Namsan Tower. Be grateful for what you had and step aside gracefully. The divorce papers are already drawn up. Sign them, take your settlement, and disappear. It will be easier for everyone, especially Yuna. The mention of her daughter's name on this woman's lips made something inside Soo-min snap. She stepped forward, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Do not say her name. You do not have the right to say her name. You are nothing but a homewrecker who used my kindness against me. Jae-won moved between them, his expression irritated rather than concerned. Enough. Both of you. This is not productive. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the marble counter. The same counter where Soo-min had kneaded dough for fresh noodles and helped Yuna with her homework. The divorce settlement is generous, Soo-min. You will receive 5% of my personal assets, which amounts to approximately 3 billion won. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign. And Yuna? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. She saw Jae-won exchange a glance with Yuna, saw the slight nod the younger woman gave him, and understood that they had already discussed this, planned this, rehearsed this conversation like a scene in a drama. Yuna stays with me. Jae-won's voice was firm, unyielding. The voice he used in boardrooms to close deals worth billions of won. A child needs her father's guidance, especially in matters of business and society. You can have visitation rights, of course, but her primary residence will be with me and Yuna. She needs stability, and I can provide that. The world tilted on its axis. Soo-min gripped the edge of the counter to keep from falling, her knuckles turning white with the force of her grip. You want to take my daughter and have her raised by your mistress? The woman who has been lying to her face for 3 years, pretending to be her friend, bringing her presents and calling her pretty while she was sleeping with you behind my back? No. I will never agree to that. Never. Then we will do this the hard way. Jae-won's expression hardened into something she barely recognized. I have the best lawyers in Seoul, the same team that handles Park Industries' international litigation. I have the media in my pocket. I have connections in every court in this country. My father plays golf with half the judges in the Seoul family court system. If you fight me on this, I will destroy you. I will make sure you never see Yoona again. I will spread rumors that will make you unemployable, unmarriageable, a pariah in every social circle that matters. Is that what you want? You would do that to the mother of your child? Soo-min whispered, searching his face for some trace of the man she had loved. I would do whatever it takes to secure my legacy. Jae-won checked his Patek Philippe watch, as if this conversation was merely an inconvenient appointment in his busy schedule. You have until the end of the week to sign the papers. After that, my offer decreases by half. Every week you delay, it decreases again. Think carefully about what you want your future to look like, Soo-min. I am trying to be reasonable here. They left together, Yoona's arm threaded through Jae-won's, her satisfied laughter echoing in the hallway as they waited for the private elevator. Soo-min stood frozen in the middle of her perfect home, surrounded by her perfect furniture from Italian designers, her perfect art collection curated by experts, her perfect life that had just revealed itself to be nothing but a beautiful illusion built on lies and betrayal. Mommy. She turned to find Yoona standing in the hallway, her drawing clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her small face. The child had heard everything, or at least enough to understand that her world was falling apart. Is Daddy leaving us? Is it because of me? Did I do something wrong? Is it because I did not practice piano enough this week? I will practice more, I promise. I will be a good girl. Soo-min crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered her daughter into her arms, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the laundry detergent she used on Yoona's pajamas. No, baby. You did nothing wrong. Nothing that is happening is your fault. You are perfect exactly as you are. Mommy loves you more than anything in this world, and I will never, ever let anyone take you away from me. Promise? I promise on my life. That night, after Yoona had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying, Soo-min sat at her vanity and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, someone she barely recognized. Gone was the confident, accomplished woman who had graduated top of her class from Korea University Law School, who had been on track to become one of the youngest partners at Lee & Kim, one of Seoul's most prestigious law firms. Gone was the woman who had argued cases before the Supreme Court, who had been featured in business magazines as a rising star. In her place was a hollow shell, a woman who had defined herself entirely by her roles as wife and mother, who had traded her ambitions for the promise of love and security, and who now faced losing both. For 12 years, she had built her life around Jae-won, organizing her days around his schedule, her social life around his business needs, her identity around being Mrs. Park. But as the hours passed and the city outside her window grew quiet, the traffic on Tehran Row finally thinning to a trickle, something shifted inside her. The grief and shock began to crystallize into something harder, something colder, something that felt almost like determination. She had been naive, yes. She had trusted too easily and loved too blindly. But she was not broken, not yet. And she would be damned if she let Jae-won Park take her daughter. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she had not called in years. Her finger hovered over the dial button, hesitating. This person owed her nothing, and she had no right to ask for help after so many years of silence. But he was the only person she knew who might be able to stand against the Park family's formidable power and win. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, groggy with sleep. Soo-min? Is that really you? It has been. What, 10 years? It is 3 in the morning. Is everything okay? No, Hajun. Everything is very far from okay. I need your help. I know I have no right to ask, but I do not know who else to turn to. There was a pause and she heard rustling sounds, as if he was sitting up in bed. "Tell me everything." Ha-jun Kim had been Soo-min's classmate at Korea University Law School, her study partner through countless late nights in the library, her closest friend during those difficult years. They had pushed each other to excel, celebrated each other's victories, consoled each other through failures. There had been a time, during their third year, when she thought there might be something more between them. She remembered the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, the electric tension when their hands accidentally touched over a shared textbook. But then she met Jae-won at a networking event at the Grand Hyatt, and his charm and ambition had swept her off her feet like a typhoon. He was handsome and confident, already building a name for himself in business despite coming from a wealthy family. He pursued her with a single-minded determination that felt intoxicating. Ha-jun had stepped aside gracefully, had even attended their wedding with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. After that, they had drifted apart, as old friends often do when life takes them in different directions. Now, sitting across from him in his modest law office in Mapogu, a small space crammed with case files and legal books, Soo-min felt a complex mixture of gratitude and guilt. Ha-jun had aged well in the decades since she had last seen him, his once boyish features settling into a distinguished handsomeness. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there before, and a few strands of gray at his temples, but they only made him look more trustworthy, more substantial. His office was a far cry from the sleek glass and steel of the corporate law firms she had grown accustomed to as Jae-won's wife. The furniture was second-hand, the carpet worn thin in places, and the windows looked out on a busy street rather than a glittering skyline. But there was warmth here, and honesty, and a sense of purpose that she had forgotten existed. Every surface was covered with case files, each one representing someone he was fighting for. "Let me make sure I understand the situation." Ha-jun leaned back in his creaky office chair, his expression serious. "Your husband wants a divorce so he can marry his pregnant mistress. He is offering you a minimal settlement, far below what you are entitled to after 12 years of marriage. He is demanding primary custody of Yuna, and he is threatening to use his money and influence to destroy you if you do not comply. Did I miss anything? That about sums it up." Soo-min smiled bitterly, accepting the cup of instant coffee he handed her. It was too strong and slightly burned. Nothing like the expensive specialty coffee she had become accustomed to, but she found it oddly comforting. "I know it sounds hopeless. He has an army of lawyers and more money than I could ever hope to match. His father is one of the most powerful men in Korea. But I cannot just give up. Yuna is everything to me." Ha-jun was quiet for a long moment. His fingers steepled beneath his chin in a gesture she remembered from law school when he was working through a particularly difficult problem. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "When did you become such a defeatist, Soo-min?" "The woman I remember from law school would never have accepted defeat before the battle even started. She would have been strategizing, finding angles, looking for weaknesses. Where is that woman? That woman does not exist anymore. She died a long time ago, smothered under the weight of being the perfect chaebol wife. I do not believe that." Ha-jun stood and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down a thick volume of Korean family law, its spine cracked from frequent use. "I think she is still in there somewhere, just waiting for permission to come back. Listen to me carefully. Jae-won may have money and power, but he has also made some serious mistakes. Mistakes that someone with your legal training should have caught immediately if you had not been so blinded by shock and grief." "What do you mean?" "First, he has been conducting an extramarital affair for 3 years. Under Korean law, that is grounds for a fault divorce, which significantly affects the division of assets. Second, he is trying to coerce you into signing a settlement under duress, using threats and intimidation. Any contract signed under such conditions is voidable. Third, and most importantly, he is prioritizing his unborn child over his existing child based solely on gender. Korean courts may be traditional in some ways, but they do not look kindly on fathers who abandon their daughters. The family courts here are staffed mostly by female judges now, and they have seen too many cases like this. But his connections? His father plays golf with judges. He has media contacts. He could destroy my reputation overnight. His connections are not as unassailable as he thinks. Ha-jun's eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like anticipation. I have spent the last 10 years building cases against exactly this kind of corporate abuse and corruption. I know every judge in Seoul who cannot be bought, every journalist who is hungry for a real story about chaebol misconduct. I have contacts at the National Tax Service, at the Financial Supervisory Service, at the Korean Commission for Corporate Governance. Jae-won Park may be powerful, but he is not invincible. And if he thinks he can bully you into submission, he is about to learn a very expensive lesson. For the first time since that terrible night, Soo-min felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. It was small and fragile, easily extinguished, but it was there. Why would you do this for me? Ha-jun? After all these years? After the way I just disappeared from your life without explanation? Ha-jun's expression softened, and for a moment she saw the young man he had been, the one who had looked at her with such obvious longing in the law library. Because you were my friend once, the best friend I ever had, and I like to think that still means something even after all this time. Because what Jae-won is doing is wrong, objectively and legally wrong, and wrong should not be allowed to win just because it has more money. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. And because I have waited a long time to see you remember who you really are, not Mrs. Park, not the perfect chaebol wife, but Lee Soo-min, the brilliant lawyer who was going to change the world. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal documents, strategy meetings, and sleepless nights. Ha-jun assembled a small but dedicated team of lawyers, investigators, and media contacts, all of whom shared his commitment to fighting corporate injustice. They worked out of his cramped office, fueled by instant coffee and delivery food, poring over Jae-won's financial records and interviewing former employees who had grievances against Park Industries. Soo-min threw herself into the work with an intensity she had not felt in years. It was like a part of her brain that had been dormant for over a decade suddenly woke up, hungry and eager. She remembered why she had loved law in the first place, the way a case could be built like a puzzle, each piece of evidence clicking into place until the picture became clear. She worked 18-hour days, barely sleeping, driven by a desperate need to protect her daughter and a growing desire to reclaim herself. What they discovered was damning. Jae-won had been systematically embezzling money from Park Industries for years, funneling it into offshore accounts in Singapore and the Cayman Islands. He had bribed government officials to secure contracts for a new development project in Songdo. He had covered up safety violations at the company's factories in Gyeonggi Province, violations that had resulted in 3 workers being seriously injured, their medical bills paid off in exchange for silence. And he had used company funds to maintain his affair with Yoon-ah, including purchasing a luxury apartment in Cheongdam-dong in her name, a Porsche 911 for her personal use, and jewelry worth hundreds of millions of won. Every gift, every trip, every expensive dinner could be traced back to accounts that should have been used for legitimate business purposes. This is bigger than I expected. Ha-jun spread the evidence across his conference table, his expression grim. We started looking for ammunition for a divorce case, and we found material for a criminal prosecution. If we go public with this, it will not just end Jae-won's marriage. It will end his career, possibly put him in prison, and bring down Park Industries' stock price. This could affect thousands of employees and shareholders. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Soo-min thought of Yoona, of the fear in her daughter's eyes every time she asked when Daddy was coming home, whether Mommy and Daddy were going to get back together. She thought of all the workers who had been injured in Jae-won's factories, their suffering covered up to protect corporate profits and stock prices. She thought of herself 12 years ago, a bright young woman with dreams and ambitions, slowly worn down into a trophy wife who existed only to make her husband look good at social functions. I am sure, but I want to give him a chance to do the right thing first. If he agrees to a fair divorce settlement and joint custody of Yoona, we can keep this quiet. I do not want to destroy him, Ha-jun. Despite everything, he is still Yoona's father. I just want my daughter and my freedom. Ha-jun nodded slowly. That is more generous than he deserves. But I understand. Family is complicated, even when it is broken. I will arrange a meeting. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a private room at the Shilla Hotel in Junggu. The room was elegant and impersonal, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Namsan Tower and neutral-toned furniture designed to project calm professionalism. Soo-min arrived with Ha-jun and one of his associates, a sharp young woman named Min-seo, who had a photographic memory for financial documents. Jae-won came with a team of 5 lawyers from Kim and Chang, all expensive suits and arrogant smiles, the kind of lawyers who charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. They carried matching leather briefcases and spoke in the clipped, efficient tones of people who expected to win. Yuna was notably absent. "I see you have hired a lawyer." Jae-won's tone was condescending as he looked Ha-jun up and down, taking in the off-the-rack suit and the scuffed shoes. "How quaint. I hope you did not pay him too much, Soo-min. This will all be over very quickly." Ha-jun smiled pleasantly, unruffled by the insult. "Mr. Park, I represent Mrs. Park in this matter. Before we proceed with discussions about the divorce settlement, I would like to present a counter-proposal to your original offer." "Counter-proposal?" Jae-won laughed, looking around at his team of lawyers as if inviting them to share the joke. "There is no counter-proposal. My offer was more than generous, considering the circumstances. If anything, I should be reducing it given how much trouble your client has caused by dragging this out." Ha-jun slid a manila folder across the polished conference table. "Perhaps you should review this before making any final decisions, Mr. Park. I think you will find it illuminating." Jae-won opened the folder with the air of someone humoring a child. His face went pale as he flipped through the contents, his carefully maintained composure cracking with each page. His lead lawyer, a gray-haired man named Director Choi, who had been with Kim and Chang for 30 years, leaned over to look, and his expression hardened. "Where did you get this?" Jae-won's voice was barely above a whisper. His hands were shaking slightly, making the papers rustle. "It does not matter where we got it. What matters is what we choose to do with it." Ha-jun's voice was calm, professional, almost pleasant. "As you can see, we have documented evidence of extensive embezzlement from Park Industries, bribery of government officials in connection with the Songdo development project, and negligence resulting in bodily harm to 3 factory employees. We have witness statements, financial records, and email communications that clearly establish your knowledge and involvement in these activities. If this information were to reach the prosecutors at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, or certain journalists at the Chosun Ilbo and Jungang Daily, I imagine it would be quite damaging to both your business interests and your personal reputation. This is blackmail." Jae-won slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing in the elegant room. "I will have you disbarred. I will sue you for extortion. I will make sure you never practice law again. It is not blackmail, Mr. Park. We are not asking for money or any improper benefit. We are simply presenting evidence that we believe is relevant to the divorce proceedings, specifically to the question of your character and fitness as a custodial parent." Ha-jun's smile did not waver. "A man's character is certainly relevant when determining what is in the best interest of a child. Would you not agree, Director Choi?" The senior lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Park, perhaps we should take a moment to discuss." "However," Ha-jun continued smoothly, "Mrs. Park is a compassionate woman, more compassionate than you deserve. She has no desire to see the father of her child imprisoned or publicly humiliated. She is willing to keep this evidence confidential, provided certain reasonable conditions are met." "What conditions?" The question came from Director Choi, who was clearly more practical than his client and could see where this was heading. "First, an equitable division of marital assets. Given that Mrs. Park contributed significantly to the accumulation of these assets through her support and sacrifice over 12 years, we believe 50% is fair and consistent with Korean family law. Second, joint custody of Yuna, with Mrs. Park as the primary residential parent. Third, child support appropriate to Mr. Park's income level. And fourth, a public statement that the divorce is amicable and mutually agreed upon, with no disparagement of Mrs. Park in any form or forum." Jae-won's face contorted with rage. "That is outrageous. You expect me to give her half of everything I have worked for, to let her keep my daughter? Never. I would rather burn it all down than let her win." Soo-min spoke for the first time, her voice steady and clear. "Jae-won, look at me." Her husband met her eyes, and she saw something there she had never noticed before in all their years together. Fear. Raw, primal fear. For all his bluster and bravado, Jae-won Park was terrified of losing control, of having his carefully constructed facade crumble. He had built his entire identity around being powerful, being in charge, being respected and feared. And now that identity was under threat, and he did not know who he was without it. I loved you. Soo-min's voice was soft but carried across the silent room. I gave you everything I had, and I asked for nothing in return except your loyalty and your love. You betrayed me. You betrayed our daughter. You brought another woman into our home and expected me to simply disappear so you could replace me with a newer model, like trading in an old car. That is not going to happen. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. But I am not trying to destroy you. I am not trying to take revenge. I just want what is fair. I want my daughter to grow up knowing that her mother fought for her, that she did not simply give up when things got hard. I want Yuna to know that when someone tries to bully you, you do not have to accept it. So here is my offer, Jae-won. Take it or leave it. But know that if you choose to fight me on this, I will not stop. I will use every weapon at my disposal, and by the time I am finished, there will not be enough left of your reputation to fill a thimble. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Jae-won's lawyers huddled together in the corner, whispering urgently, occasionally glancing back at the evidence folder on the table. Director Choi's face was grave as he conferred with his colleagues. Finally, the senior lawyer cleared his throat. We would like to request a brief recess to consult with our client in private. Of course. Ha-jun gathered his papers with unhurried precision. We will be in the lobby. Take all the time you need. In the elevator, Soo-min finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking, and she could feel her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. That was terrifying. I cannot believe I just did that. I felt like I was going to throw up the entire time. You were incredible. Ha-jun's voice was warm with admiration. You had him on the ropes from the moment you started speaking. Did you see his face when you talked about Yuna? I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Do you think he will accept? His lawyers will convince him. They know what happens if this goes to court, or worse, if it goes public. Jae-won may be arrogant, but he is not stupid. And more importantly, neither is Director Choi. They will take the deal that lets him save face and stay out of prison. They waited in the lobby for nearly 2 hours. Soo-min ordered coffee she did not drink and pretended to read a magazine while her mind raced through every possible scenario. What if Jae-won called their bluff? What if he decided to fight? Was she really prepared to go to war against one of the most powerful families in Seoul? Could she really destroy Yuna's father, even if he deserved it? Finally, Director Choi appeared, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Park has agreed to your terms, with one modification. He requests that the custody arrangement include guaranteed visitation rights during major holidays and school vacations, specifically Chuseok, Seolal, and summer break. Ha-jun looked at Soo-min, who nodded slowly after a moment's consideration. That is acceptable, provided the visits are supervised by a neutral third party until Yuna is old enough to express her own preferences, which we would suggest be age 12. We can work out the specific details in the formal agreement. Director Choi extended his hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. I believe we have a deal. The weeks that followed were filled with paperwork, logistics, and the painful process of untangling a life that had been so thoroughly intertwined with another. Soo-min moved out of the penthouse and into a smaller but comfortable apartment in Yongsan-gu, in a quiet neighborhood close enough to Yuna's school that she could walk her there every morning. The new apartment had 3 bedrooms, a small but sunny living room, and a balcony where she could grow herbs and tomatoes in the summer. The settlement was more than fair. Half of Jae-won's assets translated to over 50 billion won, more money than Soo-min had ever imagined having in her own name. She could have lived in luxury for the rest of her life, traveling the world, buying whatever she wanted, never working another day. But idleness had never suited her, and she knew that sitting still would only give her more time to dwell on the betrayal and the pain. She used a substantial portion of the settlement to establish a legal foundation for women in similar situations. Women who were being bullied or manipulated by powerful spouses, who could not afford to fight back, who had no one to turn to. She named it the Yuna Foundation, after her daughter, as a reminder of what she was fighting for. Ha-jun agreed to serve as the foundation's legal director, and they began taking on cases that no one else would touch, representing women whose husbands had money and connections and armies of lawyers. Their first client was a woman named Ji-young, married to a mid-level executive at a construction company who had been threatening to take her children if she tried to leave him. Their second was a retired singer whose famous husband had been having affairs for decades, and who had been convinced by his lawyers that she would get nothing if she filed for divorce. Their third was a young woman whose in-laws had been so abusive that she had attempted suicide twice, and who had been told by the police that it was a family matter. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same. Powerful men using their money and connections to silence and control women. Courts that were slow to intervene. A society that still, despite decades of progress, expected women to sacrifice themselves for the sake of family harmony. The Yuna Foundation took them all, fighting battles that seemed hopeless and winning more often than anyone expected. Yuna adjusted to the changes with the resilience that only children possess. She missed her father, of course, and asked about him often in the early weeks. But she also seemed to sense that a weight had been lifted from her mother's shoulders, and she responded to Soo-min's renewed energy with joy. The forced smiles and hollow reassurances of the past were replaced by genuine laughter, spontaneous hugs, and long conversations about anything and everything. "Mommy, are you happy now?" Yuna asked one evening as they walked along the Han River, watching the lights of the city reflect on the water. They had developed a routine of weekend walks, just the two of them, exploring different parts of Seoul and talking about their weeks. "I am getting there, sweetheart." Soo-min squeezed her daughter's hand. "Are you happy?" "I think so." Yuna was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously as children sometimes do. "I miss Daddy sometimes, but I like it when you smile. You did not used to smile very much before. Now you smile all the time." Soo-min felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I know, baby, but I am going to smile a lot more from now on. I promise." Meanwhile, Jae-won's life was unraveling in ways he had never anticipated. Yuna, it turned out, had expensive tastes and a volatile temper that she had carefully hidden during their affair. Without the secrecy and excitement of forbidden love, the relationship quickly soured. She demanded that he buy her a bigger apartment, this one too small for a woman of her status. She wanted a faster car, the Porsche no longer impressing her friends. She needed more jewelry, more designer clothes, more trips to Europe and America. She threw tantrums when he worked late, accusing him of seeing other women. She complained constantly about the stress of pregnancy, demanding that he hire a full-time staff of nurses and servants to cater to her every whim. She refused to attend family gatherings with his elderly parents, calling them boring and provincial. She mocked his mother's cooking and his father's old-fashioned values. Jae-won found himself longing for the quiet grace of his former wife, for Soo-min's calm presence and her ability to manage their home with effortless efficiency. He had not realized how much she had done, how many small tasks and responsibilities she had handled without complaint. The meal planning, the social calendar, the household staff management, the charity work that kept the Park family name respected in Seoul society. Now every aspect of his personal life required his attention, and he had none to spare from the constant demands of running Park Industries. His business was suffering too. Word of the divorce had spread through Seoul's social circles, carried by gossiping wives and suspicious business partners. The rumors grew more outlandish with each telling. Some said he had beaten his wife. Others claimed he had bankrupted the company to pay off gambling debts. A particularly creative version had him involved with a ring of Russian mobsters. His stock price dropped 15% in the first month, then another 10% when a financial journalist started asking questions about the Songdo project. His investors grew nervous, making calls at all hours demanding explanations. His board of directors began asking uncomfortable questions about corporate governance and ethical practices. His father, Chairman Park, called him into the family estate in Songbuk-dong for a conversation that left him shaking with humiliation. "You have brought shame on this family," the old man said, his voice cold with disappointment. "I gave you everything. I built this company with my own hands so that you could inherit it. And you threw it away for what? A common secretary? A woman with no family, no breeding, no connections? You divorced a perfectly good wife who gave you a daughter, who managed your home and your social obligations, who never caused a single scandal. For this? Father, you were the one who kept pushing me about an heir. You said the board would never accept Yuna. Do not blame your failures on me. Chairman Park slammed his hand on his desk, making the carefully arranged papers jump. You wanted an excuse to chase after that woman, and you found one. Now look at what you have done. The stock price is in free fall. Investors are pulling out. I have spent 50 years building Park Industries into something respectable, and you have nearly destroyed it in less than 50 days. The baby arrived in early spring, a squalling infant with Yuna's sharp features and a tendency to cry at all hours of the night. Jae-won had imagined this moment so many times over the years, the joy of holding his son, the heir who would carry on his legacy, the continuation of the Park family line. But the reality was nothing like his fantasies. The child was demanding, exhausting, and seemed to hate him personally. Every time Jae-won tried to hold him, he screamed louder. Every diaper change was a battle. Every feeding was a crisis. He found himself standing over the crib at 3 a.m, rocking desperately and wondering how Soo-min had made this look so easy when Yuna was born. Yuna, meanwhile, had lost all interest in motherhood approximately 5 minutes after giving birth. She demanded a full-time nanny, then a night nurse, then a wet nurse because she refused to breastfeed and ruin her figure. She spent her days shopping in Cheongdam-dong and her nights at clubs in Itaewon, leaving Jae-won to deal with the endless stream of baby-related crises while she posted photos of herself looking glamorous on Instagram. One night, as he sat in his empty penthouse listening to his son scream in the nursery and wondering where his wife had gone this time, Jae-won finally allowed himself to face the truth. He had made a terrible mistake. Not just a small error in judgment, but a catastrophic failure of everything he thought he valued. He had thrown away a woman who loved him, a daughter who adored him, a life that had been full of quiet contentment, all for the promise of something that had never existed. He had been so focused on what he thought he wanted, what his father told him he needed, that he never stopped to appreciate what he had. The grass had seemed greener on the other side, and now he was standing in a desert, wondering how he had gotten so lost. The realization came too late to change anything. Soo-min had moved on. She was thriving in her new life, building something meaningful, raising their daughter with love and strength. He saw photos of them sometimes, on social media or in the society pages, always smiling, always together. They looked happier than they had ever been when he was part of the picture. There was a lightness to Soo-min's expression that he had not seen in years, maybe ever. He tried to reconnect during his scheduled visits with Yuna, to rebuild the relationship he had so carelessly discarded. But his daughter was polite and distant, answering his questions with monosyllables and counting the minutes until she could return to her mother. She no longer ran to greet him when he arrived. She no longer showed him her drawings or told him about her day. She did her homework quietly in the corner of his penthouse, waiting for the time to pass. The bond he had taken for granted was gone, and he had no idea how to rebuild it. He tried buying her expensive gifts, but she accepted them with a lukewarm thank you and immediately forgot about them. He tried taking her to amusement parks and restaurants, but she sat through every outing with a forced smile that broke his heart. He had become a stranger to his own daughter, and he had no one to blame but himself. Yuna left him 18 months after their son was born. She packed her Louis Vuitton luggage one morning while he was at work, emptied their joint accounts of everything she could access, and disappeared to Jeju Island with a younger, wealthier man she had met at a nightclub. Some minor heir to a shipping fortune, apparently, who found her exciting and glamorous. She left the baby behind without a second thought, along with a note written on her personalized stationery that said simply, "This is not what I signed up for. Good luck with the brat. Do not try to find me." Jae-won found himself alone in his massive penthouse, a screaming toddler in his arms and no one to help him. His parents were too elderly to assist with childcare. His employees were loyal to the company, not to him personally. His friends, such as they were, had gradually drifted away as his fortunes declined and his mood soured. He had spent so many years cultivating business relationships that he had forgotten how to make actual friends. In desperation, he reached out to Soo-min, not with threats or demands this time, but with a humility he had not known he possessed. He called her late one evening after Min-jun, his son, had finally fallen asleep, and asked if she would consider letting their daughter spend more time with her half-brother. Perhaps they could find a way to be civil, he suggested, to co-parent as adults should. Soo-min listened to his request without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and he could hear his own breathing echoing in the silence. Jae-won, I am not going to pretend that what you did does not still hurt. You betrayed me in ways that I am still processing, even now. But I have also moved past the anger. It was eating me alive, and I refuse to let it consume me anymore. I have built a new life, and I am genuinely happy. Probably happier than I ever was with you. I can see that. Jae-won's voice was rough with emotion. You look different. Lighter, somehow. I am sorry, Soo-min. I know that does not fix anything, but I am sorry. I was a fool. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too blind to see its value. I let my father's expectations and my own ego destroy everything good in my life. Yuna has a brother. He did not choose his parents. He did not ask to be born into this situation. If you want him to have a relationship with his sister, I will not stand in the way of that. Children need family, and whatever happened between us, Min-jun is innocent. But you need to understand something, Jae-won. I am not going to rescue you. I am not going to step in and fix your life because you have finally realized what you lost. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. That is not cruelty. That is just reality. I know. I am not asking for rescue. I am just asking for... He paused, searching for the right word. Grace, I suppose, more than I deserve. Soo-min considered this. Grace is not something you earn. It is something that is given freely, or not at all. I will talk to Yuna. If she wants to spend time with her brother, I will make it happen. Beyond that, I make no promises. Thank you. That is more than I have any right to expect. 3 years passed, and the world continued to turn. The Yuna Foundation grew into a respected institution, helping hundreds of women navigate difficult divorces and custody battles. They won landmark cases that set new precedents in family law. They lobbied successfully for changes to domestic violence legislation. They provided shelter and support for women fleeing abusive situations. Soo-min was interviewed by magazines and newspapers, invited to speak at conferences, cited as an example of how to turn personal tragedy into public good. Ha-jun was a constant presence in her life throughout it all, first as a colleague, then as a friend, and eventually as something more. They did not rush into romance. They had both been hurt too deeply for that. Both carried too much baggage from their pasts. But gradually, through shared work and shared values and countless late-night conversations over cheap wine and delivery chicken, they built something real and lasting. Something that was not based on fantasy or infatuation, but on genuine understanding and mutual respect. When he finally kissed her, on a rainy evening after they had won a particularly difficult case, Soo-min felt something she had not experienced in so long she had almost forgotten it existed. Peace, safety, the sense of being truly known and accepted, flaws and all. I have been waiting to do that for about 15 years, Ha-jun said, his forehead resting against hers. That seems like a long time to wait. You were worth waiting for. Yuna thrived as well. She excelled in school, developed a passion for art that her teachers encouraged, and grew into a confident, compassionate young girl who knew her own worth. She maintained a relationship with her father, visiting him on weekends and holidays as the custody agreement required, though the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. She was polite but guarded, kind but not intimate. Jae-won had to accept that some damage could not be undone, some trust could not be rebuilt. She also developed a genuine affection for her half-brother Min-jun, a sweet-natured child who had inherited none of his mother's selfishness. The little boy adored his big sister, following her around with wide eyes whenever she visited, showing her his toys and his drawings, asking her endless questions about everything. On the occasions when the siblings were together, Soo-min watched them play and felt something she had not expected. Peace. The past could not be changed, but the future was still being written. One autumn afternoon, almost exactly 4 years after that terrible night when her world had shattered, Soo-min stood at the window of her office and watched the leaves drift down from the ginkgo trees. The foundation had moved into a proper office building in Jongno-gu, with enough space for their growing team of lawyers and counselors and administrators. The walls were covered with thank you cards from clients, photos from events, awards, and recognitions. Hajun came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" Soo-min smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "I was thinking about how strange life is. 4 years ago, I thought my life was ending. I thought I would never be happy again. I was ready to give up everything just to make the pain stop. And now look at us. And now I realize that it was not an ending at all. It was a beginning. I just could not see it at the time." Hajun pressed a kiss to her temple. "I am glad you called me that night. I know it was hard for you to reach out after so many years. I almost did not. I was so ashamed. I thought you would judge me for the choices I had made, for giving up my career, for letting myself become so dependent on someone else. I would never judge you for following your heart. Even when it leads you somewhere painful, that is just part of being human. What matters is what you do when you realize you have lost your way. And you found your way back. That is what counts." Soo-min turned in his arms to face him. "Have I told you lately how grateful I am that you are in my life? You might have mentioned it once or twice." Hajun's eyes crinkled with warmth, "But I never get tired of hearing it." The door burst open and Yuna rushed in, her face flushed with excitement, her school bag bouncing on her shoulder. "Mommy! Uncle Hajun!" "Guess what? I got the lead role in the school play. I am going to be the queen in our production of Hamlet. Not the prince, but the queen. And Mrs. Kang said my audition was the best she has seen in 10 years. Soo-min caught her daughter in a hug, laughing at her enthusiasm. "That is wonderful, sweetheart. I am so proud of you. Can Uncle Hajun come to the performance? And Daddy too? And maybe Minjun? He is old enough now, right?" She bounced on her toes, unable to contain her energy. "I want everyone to see me be a queen. I am sure we can arrange that." Soo-min exchanged a glance with Hajun over her daughter's head. "We will all be there cheering you on." As she watched Yuna dance around the office, describing her costume and her lines and her grand plans for the performance, Soo-min felt a swell of emotions so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Her life had not turned out the way she expected. The fairy tale she had imagined as a young woman, with its perfect husband and perfect home and perfect happiness, had been an illusion. But what she had now was real. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it was genuine in a way that illusions could never be. She had learned something important through all the heartbreak and struggle. Love was not about grand gestures or perfect moments or fairy tale endings. It was about showing up, day after day, for the people who mattered. It was about being honest, even when the truth was difficult. It was about having the courage to start over when everything fell apart, and the wisdom to recognize what was truly valuable. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it was about finding your way back to yourself after getting lost in someone else's dreams. Later that evening, after Yuna had finally exhausted herself with excitement and fallen asleep, Soo-min sat on her balcony watching the city lights. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of roasting chestnuts from the vendor on the corner. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell was ringing. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jae-won. "Yuna told me about the play. I would like to attend if that is okay. I will sit in the back. I do not want to make things awkward for anyone." She typed back, "Of course you can attend. You are her father. Just because our marriage ended does not mean you stop being her parent." A long pause then. "Thank you, Soo-min, for everything. I know I do not say it enough, but I am grateful for the grace you have shown me. Far more than I deserve." Soo-min considered her response carefully. "We all make mistakes, Jae-won. The measure of a person is not whether they fall, but whether they get back up and try to do better. I think you are trying. That matters. I am trying. It is harder than I expected. Being a single parent, I mean. I do not know how you made it look so easy all those years when I was never there to help. It was not easy. You just were not paying attention." Another pause. "I know. I see that now. I see a lot of things now that I was blind to before. I am sorry it took losing everything to open my eyes." Soo-min set down her phone and gazed out at the darkness beyond the city lights. There was a time when Jae-won's remorse would have meant everything to her, when she would have given anything to hear him acknowledge his mistakes. Now it felt like a footnote to a chapter she had already closed. The anger was gone, replaced by something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. An understanding that some stories do not have neat endings, that some wounds heal into scars that never quite fade, and that was okay. Ha-jun appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of tea in his hands. Everything okay? Everything is fine. Soo-min accepted the tea with a grateful smile. Jae-won asked if he could come to Yuna's play. I said yes. That was kind of you. Ha-jun settled into the chair beside her. Though I suspect your kindness is harder for him to bear than your anger ever was. Soo-min laughed softly. Maybe. But I am done being angry. It takes too much energy that I would rather spend on other things. Like what? Like building something good. Like raising my daughter to be strong and kind and brave. Like being with someone who sees me for who I really am, not who they want me to be. She reached over and took his hand. Like this. Right now. This moment. This is what matters. Ha-jun lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I like this moment too. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over Seoul. Somewhere in the city, Jae-won was probably pacing in his penthouse, trying to get Min-jun to sleep, wondering how his life had gone so wrong. Somewhere, Yuna was chasing her next thrill with her new wealthy boyfriend, never stopping to consider the damage she left in her wake. But here, on this small balcony in Yongsan-gu, 2 people who had found their way through darkness sat together and watched the stars appear one by one. 2 people who had known each other as hopeful young law students, who had been separated by circumstance and fate, and who had found their way back to each other at exactly the right moment. The price of betrayal, Soo-min reflected, was paid not just by the betrayed, but by the betrayer. Jae-won had traded his family for an illusion, and now he lived with the consequences every day. She could take no pleasure in his suffering, but neither did she feel obligated to rescue him from it. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way. As for herself, she had emerged from the fire transformed. The naive young woman who had sacrificed everything for love had grown into someone stronger, wiser, more fully herself than she had ever been before. She had learned that happiness was not something that could be given to you by another person. It had to be built brick by brick from the inside out. It had to be chosen day after day, even when choosing it was hard. She had learned that true love was not about grand romantic gestures or perfect fairy tale endings, but about showing up consistently, day after day, with patience and kindness and respect. And she had learned, perhaps most importantly, that the end of one story was always the beginning of another. The fairy tale had ended in ashes, but from those ashes, something real had grown. Something that did not depend on illusions or pretense. Something that could withstand the storms to come. Mommy? Yuna's sleepy voice drifted from the doorway, pulling her from her reverie. I had a bad dream. Soo-min opened her arms, and her daughter crawled into her lap, warm and heavy with sleep. I am here, sweetheart. I have got you. Will you stay with me until I fall asleep again? Always. Soo-min pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. Always. Ha-jun watched them with a soft smile, and Soo-min felt her heart swell with gratitude for this imperfect, complicated, beautiful life she had built. It was not the life she had imagined when she was young and full of dreams. It was better because it was real. The seasons turned as they always do. Spring blossomed into summer with cherry blossoms and roses and the sound of children playing in the parks. Summer ripened into autumn with chrysanthemums and persimmons and the smell of roasting sweet potatoes from street vendors. Autumn settled into winter with the first snowfall covering the city in white and the warmth of heated floors in traditional restaurants. Each day brought its small joys and small challenges, the ordinary rhythms of a life well lived. Yuna grew taller and more confident, navigating the complexities of middle school with remarkable grace. Ha-jun's presence in their home became as natural as breathing, his gentle humor and quiet strength a cornerstone of their daily existence. The foundation continued its work, helping more women every year find their footing after devastating betrayals. One winter morning, a young woman appeared at the foundation's offices, her face bruised and her eyes hollow with fear. She was perhaps 25, wearing clothes that had once been expensive but were now wrinkled and dirty, clutching a small overnight bag like it contained everything she owned in the world. She reminded Soo-min painfully of herself all those years ago, standing in her perfect penthouse with her perfect life crumbling around her. "My husband says he will destroy me if I leave." The young woman's voice trembled. "He says no one will believe me. He says I will lose everything, that his family will make sure I never work again, never see my family again, never have another moment of peace." Soo-min took her hands gently. "I know how that feels. I know how impossible it seems right now. But I promise you, there is another side to this. There is a life waiting for you where you do not have to be afraid anymore. And we are going to help you get there, step by step, for as long as it takes." The young woman burst into tears, and Soo-min held her while she cried, remembering her own tears, her own despair, the moment when she thought she would never be whole again. She remembered Ha-jun's office, the instant coffee, the stacks of case files, the first fragile spark of hope. She remembered everything she had learned in the years since, all the battles won and lost, all the women she had helped and the few she could not. Later, as she walked home through the snow-covered streets of Seoul, Soo-min thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this place. The pain of betrayal, the struggle for survival, the slow rebuilding of a shattered life. None of it had been easy. None of it had been fair. But all of it had been necessary, she realized, to become the person she was meant to be. Ha-jun was waiting for her at home, with hot chocolate and a fire crackling in the fireplace. Yoona was sprawled on the couch, doing homework with half her attention, while the other half was absorbed in her phone. It was an ordinary scene, the kind of moment that would never make it into a drama or a fairy tale. But to Soo-min, it was everything. "How was your day?" Ha-jun asked, handing her a mug. A new client came in. Young woman, bad situation. It brought back a lot of memories. "Are you okay?" Soo-min considered the question carefully. "I am better than okay. I am exactly where I am supposed to be, doing exactly what I am supposed to be doing. It is just that sometimes I remember how close I came to losing all of this, and it takes my breath away." Ha-jun pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You did not lose it. You fought for it. There is a difference." Yoona looked up from her homework with the particular expression of long-suffering patience that teenagers reserve for their parents being affectionate. "Can you two be gross somewhere else? I am trying to study for my history exam." Soo-min laughed, and the sound filled the room like music. "Never. You are stuck with us." Yoona rolled her eyes dramatically, but she was smiling. "I suppose there are worse things." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. The streetlights cast warm, golden circles on the fresh powder. A couple walked by, arm in arm, laughing at something. Life went on, beautiful and ordinary and precious. Somewhere across Seoul, Jae-won was probably working late in his office, trying to hold together a company that had never quite recovered from the scandal of his divorce. He saw his children when the custody agreement allowed, and he tried his best to be a good father to both of them, though he knew he would never fully repair the damage he had caused. He had learned too late that some things were more valuable than legacy or heirs or the approval of a demanding father. The world was full of people making terrible choices, hurting each other, stumbling through the darkness. But here, in this small apartment in Yongsan-gu, there was warmth and laughter and love. There was a woman who had learned to stand on her own feet. There was a child who knew she was cherished. There was a man who had waited patiently for years, asking nothing, offering everything. It was not a fairy tale. Fairy tales were lies dressed up in pretty clothes, promising happily ever afters that real life could never deliver. This was something better. This was truth. This was what happened when you stopped waiting for someone to save you and decided to save yourself. Soo-min looked around at her small, imperfect, beautiful life and felt a peace she had not known was possible settle into her bones. The price of betrayal had been high, but in the end, she had gained more than she lost. She had gained herself. And that, she realized, was worth everything. 6 months later, Ha-jun proposed on a quiet evening at home, not with grand gestures or expensive rings, but with simple words spoken from the heart. He knelt before her in their living room, Yoona watching from the doorway with barely contained excitement, and asked if she would do him the honor of being his wife. Soo-min looked at this man who had waited for her, who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself, who had helped her rebuild everything she thought she had lost. She thought about what marriage meant to her now, after everything she had been through. It was not about security or status or fairy tale endings. It was about partnership, about choosing to face life together, about building something real with someone who saw you clearly and loved you anyway. Yes, she said, and the word felt like a promise and a beginning all at once. The wedding was small, held in a garden in Bukhansan, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. Yoona served as the maid of honor, her face beaming with joy as she watched her mother walk down the aisle. Even Jae-won sent a congratulatory message, surprising everyone with his graciousness. Perhaps he had finally made peace with the past, or perhaps he simply understood that some things were bigger than wounded pride. As Soo-min stood beside Ha-jun, exchanging vows in the soft autumn light, she thought about all the paths her life might have taken. She thought about the young woman she had been, full of dreams and ambitions, and the woman she had become, tempered by pain but stronger for it. She thought about the power of choice, of deciding every day to move forward instead of backward, to hope instead of despair, to love instead of hate. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I promise to be honest with you, even when honesty is hard. I promise to respect your dreams and support your growth. I promise to love you not as a fairy tale, but as a real person, with all the mess and beauty that entails." Ha-jun's eyes were bright with emotion as he made his own vows. "I promise to see you, truly see you, every single day. I promise to be your partner in everything, the good and the bad and the ordinary. I promise to make you laugh when you are sad and to hold you when the world is too much. I promise to love you for who you are, not who I want you to be." When they kissed, sealing their promises, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Yoona ran forward to embrace them both, and for a moment, the three of them stood together in a tangle of arms and tears and laughter. A new family, born not of blood or obligation, but of choice and love. The years that followed were not without challenges. Life never is. There were arguments and misunderstandings, sleepless nights, and difficult decisions. The foundation faced setbacks and triumphs. Yoona grew into a teenager with all the drama and intensity that entailed. Min-jun continued to be a sweet presence in their lives, visiting on holidays and summer vacations, slowly becoming part of their extended family. But through it all, there was a foundation of trust and respect that held everything together. When problems arose, they faced them as partners. When one of them struggled, the other was there to help carry the weight. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small irritations and the profound joys of sharing a life. Soo-min often thought about what she would tell her younger self if she could go back in time. She would say that heartbreak was not the end, only a beginning in disguise. She would say that the worst moments of your life could become the foundation for your greatest strengths. She would say that happiness was not a destination but a practice, something you had to choose and nurture every single day. Most importantly, she would say that you could survive things you never imagined surviving, and emerge on the other side not diminished but transformed. That the human heart was capable of healing in ways that seemed impossible when you were in the depths of pain. That there was always hope, even in the darkest moments, if you were brave enough to look for it. On a warm spring evening, 5 years after her divorce and 3 years after her second wedding, Soo-min sat on a bench in Uido Park, watching Yoona practice for her high school art exhibition. Her daughter had grown into a remarkable young woman, talented and kind, with her father's ambition tempered by her mother's compassion. She was planning to study art history at university, and already galleries were interested in her work. Ha-jun sat beside her, their hands intertwined, comfortable in the silence that only comes with deep familiarity. Across the park, Min-jun was kicking a soccer ball with some other children, his laughter carrying on the spring breeze. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, their petals drifting down like pink snow. "Are you happy?" Ha-jun asked, echoing a question Yuna had asked years ago. Soo-min smiled, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain and the growth, the loss and the discovery, the ending that became a beginning. Yes, she said, I am happy. And she meant it, not as a denial of the struggles or a dismissal of the scars, but as a simple statement of truth. She had built a good life, a real life, full of love and purpose and meaning. The price of betrayal had been steep, but she had paid it in full and emerged with something precious on the other side. The cherry blossoms continued to fall, and the sun began to set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the city, Jae-won was probably working late, still trying to rebuild what he had lost. Yuna had long since faded into obscurity, just another cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and selfishness. But here, in this park, surrounded by the people she loved, Soo-min felt only gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, difficult as it had been. Gratitude for the lessons, painful as they were. Gratitude for the chance to start over, to become someone new, to discover that happiness was not something you found, but something you created. The price of betrayal, she understood now, was not just what you lost. It was also what you gained. The strength you discovered you had. The clarity that came from having everything stripped away. The opportunity to rebuild your life according to your own values instead of someone else's expectations. In the end, the price of betrayal was transformation. And transformation, however it came, was always worth the cost.